attitudes. So these are the opinions, beliefs that you have about people, objects, ideas, basically how we feel about the world around us. With attitudes, a person might say one thing and do another. So the question is, do attitudes actually predict behavior? As an example, you do a survey and the participant says, yeah, I'm super into recycling. So recycling's great. And then on the way out, they take a plastic bottle and they throw it in the trash instead of recycling. Their attitudes don't match their behaviors in that situation. And that's called a lack of attitude behavioral consistency. Attitudes don't match the behaviors. So what criteria are there for when attitudes do actually predict behavior? And so researchers say there are 3 of them. First, when the attitude is strong. Second, when the person rehearses and practices their attitude. If you're given a speech, for example, you learn that attitude, you incorporate it well into yourself. And the third, when there is something at stake for the person. A good example of this would be there's a rally to change the drinking age to 18. Who's going to show up to that? It's going to be 18 to 20-year-olds that are going to show up to that. A 21-year-old could care less about changing the drinking age. Okay, moving on to cognitive dissonance theory. So this is psychological discomfort when you have 2 inconsistent thoughts. It makes us feel uneasy when we have these inconsistent thoughts. So if your behavior doesn't match up with your attitudes or vice versa, you need to change one so that you are consistent as a person. Spoiler alert, it's a lot easier to change your attitude than it is your behavior. You could change an attitude like that, but a behavior, you're going to have to put in a lot of effort to actually change that. A classic study on cognitive dissonance, researchers had participants complete these really boring tasks like turning wooden pegs. Then they had these participants try to convince what they thought was another participant that was coming into the lab that it was actually an enjoyable, fun task. The other person was actually a confederate, which is a research assistant that's helping with the experiment. So half the participants, they paid $1 to do this, to say it was a fun task. The other half were paid $20. Afterwards, they had the participants rate how enjoyable the task actually was. And so the people that they paid $1 to rated the task significantly more fun than the people that they paid $20 to. So why would that be? What the researchers say is that the people paid $20 were able to justify the lie. I did it for the money. The people that were just paid $1, though, they couldn't justify lying for such a small amount. So what they had to do was convince themselves that it was a fun task. This research was started in the late 50s. There's a bunch more if you want to look at it on PsycInfo. It is really an interesting and possibly even scary phenomenon. Basically, how easily that you can manipulate yourself, how easy it is to deceive yourself, self-deception. Related to this is a term called effort justification. Basically, you're coming up with rationalization for the amount of work you put into something. This can help explain, in part, things like strong group loyalty. You love your frat, for example, or you love being in the military because you had to do a lot of work to get into those groups. So if it's tough to get in, it must have been worth it, is what you tell yourself. Related to this is self-perception theory. Basically, that you look at your past behaviors to make inferences about your attitudes. So if someone asks you about your attitudes about voting, and you remember standing in line for hours to vote during the last election, you would say you have a strong attitude towards voting because that's what your behavior shows. All right, the next section we will cover persuasion, which is trying to change someone's attitude and maybe even their behavior. There are 4 things involved in persuasion that are listed in the text. First, the communicator, the person actually doing the persuading. Are they believable? Are they trustworthy? Do they have expertise? Do they have power? Do they have likability? Maybe even are they attractive? These are all characteristics that can influence the speaker's persuasive abilities. Second thing is the medium. Where are you getting this message from? The newspaper, TV, Twitter? It usually depends on the context, but some medias are better some of the time. As an example, TV is usually more persuasive than newspapers because it presents live images. Third part is the audience. Younger people, they are more likely to change their attitudes compared to older people, and people with weak attitudes are more likely to change than people with strong attitudes. And finally, the message. Does the message have a lot of strong logical arguments, or is it more of an emotional-based persuasive message? And which one of these two is going to be more likely to be persuasive is going to depend on the circumstances. And this has been investigated in the research line into what they call the elaboration likelihood model. So with ELM, there are two different pathways to persuasion. You have the central route and the peripheral route. The central route uses strong logical arguments. This route is more effective if the person has time to think about the message, or if they are highly interested in that thought, if they have a lot of interest in learning more about that topic. The peripheral route, though, is using things more like an emotional appeal, attractiveness, and this is more effective when the person isn't paying close attention or they don't have the time/energy to think about it. Advertisements on TV are likely to use the peripheral route because they're trying to use emotions, they're trying to use attractiveness. Can use both, though. Maybe pull them in at first with an emotional message and then lay out a lot of strong logical arguments. A couple of other ways to set up successful persuasion: foot in the door and door in the face. With foot in the door, you are making a small request first and then your biggest demand at the end. The idea here is that if you agree to a smaller request, you're going to build a relationship with that persuader, and then it creates an attitude in the persuadee's head. I like what this person is selling. I must have liked it, or I wouldn't have said yes the first time. Example: salesperson says, you want a 3-month trial subscription to the magazine? You say yes. They're like, great. Well, how about a full year then? You already liked the 3 months. Why not a year? You already got that yes out of them, so you might be able to get a second yes out of them easily. The door in the face is kind of the opposite. You make a big request first, knowing that you're going to get rejected, and then you actually ask for something smaller, the thing that you wanted the entire time. This tactic relies on the idea that there is an obligation, that you let them off the hook with the big request, so it's only fair that they go along with your smaller request. Example: you ask them to buy a year subscription to the magazine. You're like, no, I don't want an entire year to a magazine I haven't even tried out. Oh, okay. Well, how about a 3-month trial then, just to give it a try? That's a face in the door. Door in the face, sorry. These kind of persuasive tricks are things that you want to be aware of so that you can resist them. Knowledge is power. If you know how these tactics work, then when you go to try to buy a car, you won't be swindled. There are several other ways to resist, including what they call inoculation. It's like a vaccine. You introduce yourself to a weak version of the persuasive message, then you build an immunity towards that message. An example of this, you could be made aware of the persuasive messages that credit card marketing appeals make. You'll be warned about the persuasive appeals they'll try to use so that you can build an immunity towards those messages. So when someone calls you on the phone and tries to use those messages on you, those persuasive messages, you're already aware of them, you already have immunity to them. That's inoculation. If you are interested in persuasive tactics, I suggest you look at the work of Robert Cialdini. He has a number of academic publications, and he wrote a great book for the layman titled Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion. Okay, that wraps up attitudes and social cognition. On the next slide, we will start with social behaviors and altruism.